Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, October 17th, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Daniel Medwed, professor of law and criminal justice at Northeastern University, author of Barred, Why the Innocent Can't Get Out of Prison. Also on the program today, about 3 weeks out from the midterm elections, New York Times Siena poll shows the generic ballot favoring the Republicans. Russia strikes Kyiv with so-called kamikaze drones. Senate races heat up. Don't sleep on Iowa, folks. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance cancels a fundraiser with an opioid pill mill doc after news report. Warnock slams Walker for no-showing at debate number 2. Ohio Republican Party ignores the Ohio Supreme Court, goes to the Roberts Court seeking permission to partisan gerrymandering. Oklahoma City Apple Store, the second in the country to vote for a union. Meanwhile, voting ends at the Albany Amazon union vote today. Should be another week or two before we get results. Over-the-counter, lower-cost hearing aids are on sale today for the first time after that Biden administration rule over the summer. And John Durham's attempt at salvaging anything of the Investigating the Investigators trial goes to closing arguments, and it doesn't look good for him. Uganda locks down over Ebola. Likely story. All the mask fanatics having a field day in Uganda, I bet. And 90% of Alaskan snow crabs have disappeared in just under 3 years. 90%. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us on a Monday. Also joining me on this Monday, and I am back in studio, of course, as she does on every Monday, Emma Vigeland. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Sam. How was Vegas? I ask as if I did not ask you before the show.
Right. It was fine. Yeah, it was okay. It was a little bit tiring. It was hard. You know, we had technical problems because I'd been sort of out of practice, and but it was good. I didn't lose that much money, if that's what you're asking.
That's what it felt when you started your answer the way you did.
That I lost a lot of money?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, probably $150 I'm down.
Okay.
That's not horrible.
No.
And, all in all, not bad. Ran into 3 different fans of the show. One who's a younger guy who's it was his birthday, and he was running around the hotel I was at, looking to run into us. He had talked to Michael back in the day and was trying to figure out what he was going to do. Sounded like a really like an ambitious. He's not a kid, but to me, he's a kid. And met another guy who was a security guard who had who was on the floor at the Paris. I mean, Paris was it's really changed over the years.
Okay.
Not the hotel,
Right.
whatever. I'm making
Yeah.
a dumb Paris joke, but and the security guard was had some of the biggest biceps I've ever seen on a person, and he looked at me, and I immediately thought, like, I don't know what I did wrong, but this could be a problem. And he was pointing, but he came up, and he was a fan of the show. And then there was a dealer, a card dealer.
Card dealer
Yep.
who liked the show. Nice. All right.
So-
Well, that's fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Always fun. Eddie Munster asking on the IM, Emma, who's your guest host today?
Someone named Sam.
Right, there you go. And Sam's Tight Pants also says, Georgia voter here, early voting starts today. Check out mvp.sos.ga.gov to look up your polling location or sample ballot.
mvp.sos. I mean, it's like they're
GA
trying to make it
dot-
as difficult as possible, which would not be shocking
How
in
about
Georgia.
go buy a URL
Yes,
that says
hello.
Georgia voting?
We know how to do this, but
Yep.
that literally might be part of it. They want to make voting as hard as possible.
You need
so.
a VPN then too.
We're going to get into this in the fun half, but there is so many different mixed signals, it feels like to me, as to what is happening with this election that I can't even, the New York Times Siena poll shows like sort of an increasing advantage to Republicans in the generic ballot. But then the AP poll says that that something like 70% of Americans see this as one of the most important elections of their lifetime, and Democrats have a 4% advantage in that one. The generic poll seems to be a shift of independents who are moving towards the Republicans, ostensibly because gas prices and inflation is still up there. And of course, the inflation stuff is it is price gouging. And, the one thing that Warnock did well, and I covered the debate for the first time ever, I streamed OBS and put up the chat on the side, and it was very exciting for people. I don't know if it was that exciting for people.
Got a lot of views.
But Warnock, in the debate, and like I said on the stream, it felt like at the end that Warnock had counted on Walker imploding, and they didn't have a plan B. And I don't know at what point in the debate do you get a sense that that Walker's not going to implode. I mean, 60-second answers, right, is the longest answer they were allowed. I mean, so at one point you got to contemplate, like, what if he can just go 60 seconds? And he can.
Yeah.
I mean, and he had learned a couple of things by rote and this and that.
and he's a public speaker. Right?
Yes. And
an athlete, I mean, who understands how when I'm going to hit these notes and I'm going to remember and I'm going to perform and I'm not scared about any kind of high pressure situation, that was the case. It seemed like he had a strategy coming in, and Warnock just wanted to play prevent defense, and he wanted to look senatorial. That's what stuck out to me, which is such bad Democratic consultant
DC influence.
logic.
Yes.
Always that kind of prevent defense stuff.
And the idea that there wasn't a plan B, and that they couldn't have been more aggressive with his lying about the abortion, even if he had said, I respect your position on wanting to ban all abortion, which, obviously is one of those, it's not really, but I'll say it. But it's that you've been lying and hypocritical about it that I think bothers most people. And it even bothers your family. Just a line like that or two that would have been the one that was repeated over and over again.
Your son said you were a liar.
I mean, I don't know if I would go that specific, honestly, because you don't need to.
Right.
And you don't want to be, and I can understand walking a certain line, but, they may have some type of theory that, with two black candidates, that the one who's going to seem more, above the fray is better. But I just don't think they did enough to press the point. But it remains to be seen, because no one's not asking Herschel Walker these questions. And, we just got that note in Georgia. gas prices are around $3.20 according to Sam's Tight Pants. And if that is the case, it's on the lower side of where it is. Maybe the pressure's not, maybe abortion gets to the forefront. It's just very hard to know at this point. But here is Herschel Walker doing a one-on-one. This is with on the Today Show with Kristen Welker. And the idea of this is not so much, in my mind, it is both to remind people that Herschel Walker may not be as trustworthy of a guy, although they haven't seemed to push that narrative. At least they didn't during the debate. But the idea is maybe to remind people of his abortion stance. I don't have a sense. But here is Welker pushing Walker.
In a one-on-one interview in his hometown of Wrightsville, Georgia, Herschel Walker providing his most extensive comments about allegations he paid for an ex-girlfriend to have an abortion in 2009.
Why not reach out to her? And
Why should I? Why do I need to?
NBC News has now spoken to that former girlfriend who provided us with what she says is a copy of a $700 check that Walker gave her to pay for the abortion and a receipt from the medical center in Georgia where she alleges it took place. NBC News is not revealing the woman's identity or the documents to protect the privacy of all parties. But we did show a copy of the check to Walker, who said the allegation he paid for an abortion isn't true.
This is still a lie because she's the mother of my child. So you're going to see me a check or somebody giving a check. So that I'm saying it's a lie.
do you know what this $700 check is for?
I have no idea what that can be for.
Is that your signature on the check, though?
Let me see. It could be. But it doesn't matter whether it's my signature or not.
When pressed, Walker said definitively for the first time the check is his.
Yes, that's my check.
Why should voters believe you in this
Voters
moment?
should believe me because I've been very transparent about everything I've ever done.
He has also faced allegations.
I'll tell you what's frustrating about this to me. First off, the question should be, she is the mother of one of your children. And and if I'm not mistaken, she became the mother of his child after the first abortion. Right? I mean, so the idea that he's sending money to her, that's an easy thing for Welker to bring up. The other is that the accusation of him being untrue is being delivered by his son, who, by making himself so public at the beginning of this campaign, is fair game to quote. I mean, it's one thing for, Warnock to not want to do it because he doesn't want to be, but this is what the media at this instance should be doing. Christian Walker made himself part of this campaign. He was almost in some ways more visible in certain quarters than even Walker was at the beginning of the campaign.
She does. Do you want to see more where they talk about Christian?
Yes,
okay.
Let's hear that.
Of domestic violence from multiple women, including his ex-wife and his 23-year-old son, Christian, a conservative influencer.
He said, and I'll just quote for you, "You threatened to kill us and had us move over 6 times in 6 months, running from your violence." You have said you love your son, Christian.
Right.
Just for the voters who want to hear an answer to the allegation about violence.
Okay,
Is that true?
I'm tell you,
what should people
voters,
know?
I would say I love my son Christian. I love my whole family. I'll always love them and stuff. That's what I say for my son Christian. And I don't have any violence.
Walker has also faced.
Wow, that really hammered him on that. That was.
And
I love my son and stuff.
Just the timeline from the New York Times here. A woman who has said Herschel Walker, the Republican Senate nominee in Georgia, paid for abortion in 2009, told the New York Times that he urged her to terminate a second pregnancy 2 years later. They ended their relationship after she refused.
Right. I mean, the idea that he says, well, she's the mother of my child, I'm sending her
You wanted
checks.
her to abort that one.
Well, that one, first off, that check was written 2 years before she was the mother of your child. And speaking of mother of your child, she's claiming you said you wanted that one aborted. I mean, this is not rocket science.
The more I see that, the more annoyed I am about Friday, because I just feel that, Democrats, it seems like traditional old Democratic playbook where they are afraid to engage in politics to that degree because it makes them, it's like beneath the dignity of the office, and it's this kind of heralding of of the Senate or of institutions at the expense of actually doing politics, because that was not emphasized enough on Friday. And then on Sunday, when Walker didn't show up to that second debate, that's when Warnock was getting a little bit more aggressive and pointing things out. And then you look, pardon my French, chicken shit, because he's not on stage next to you.
Yep.
And I don't know how much this makes a difference, but it certainly did not help Warnock. And seeing them next to each other on stage, it's just like, damn, these stakes are high. This guy could be a U.S. senator. And it was just a reminder of, wow, this is really in play. And there's a lot at stake here, not just based on the merits of the individual Senate seat, but because this could be the seat that flips it to the Republicans.
Yep. The idea that, if your opponent is doing damage to themselves, let them, don't get in the way. First off, it fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between Republican candidates and Republican voters. And it also fundamentally misunderstands the nature of our media system now. Mm-hmm. And it feels like Democrats are still 20-year operating under the rules that existed 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe even closer to 30 years ago. But we got some words from our sponsors, and then we're going to be talking to Daniel Medwed, professor of law and criminal justice at Northeastern University, author of Barred, Why the Innocent Can't Get Out of Prison. First, a sponsor today. We have the midterm elections are here. 435 seats in the House of Representatives, 35 seats in the Senate are up for grabs. All those roles need to be filled with the most qualified people. Not an easy task, right? But not every role has to be that difficult to fill, especially if you're hiring for your business. Mm-mm. How do I fill crucial roles?
You don't hire Herschel Walker?
I do not hire Herschel Walker. In fact, I would imagine ZipRecruiter would have weeded out Herschel Walker if it was being used in that case. ZipRecruiter does the work for you. Right now, you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. When you post your job on ZipRecruiter, it uses powerful technology, helps you find the right candidates and match them up with your job, and then it sends them to you. We hired Brendan, old Brendan. He's old. Well, he's still helping us with the show. But we hired him through ZipRecruiter, and it literally found him and brought him in. We had a bunch of very qualified candidates. It's just that he was if he had admitted to me at the end of his tenure, I was actually created in a petri dish specifically for this job, I would have been like, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
And then it has a great user interface that you can use to sort all the candidates, provide an internal ranking for yourself. Who do I want to interview? What assets, what strengths do they have? And then notes afterwards. I mean, it all makes it incredibly easy and effective. If you want a better way to find great people for your team, try ZipRecruiter for free right now at this special URL, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. Once again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/majority. MAJORITY. Then elect to take some time for you because you've got ZipRecruiter to help. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And as I say, folks, the best time to look for people just to see what's out there is when you don't need somebody. So you get a sense of how hard is it going to be filled? If, somebody shows up one day and says I'm giving my 2 weeks notice. Definitely worth while doing it that way. Meanwhile, I have been very diligent in having a morning exercise routine.
Wow.
More days than, I just do 15, 20 minutes.
Nice.
Like calisthenics.
Cool.
And I am also very happy to announce, I think I've mentioned this before, I've been in a very good multivitamin habit. Very important, particularly at my age, but for everybody. And how do I do that? Ritual. It's a company that was founded by a skeptical mom. She didn't trust the multivitamins that were out there. Ritual has a first of its kind traceable supply chain. So you can see where all of your key ingredients come from and why they are there. This is important because, you can just do a little bit of Googling and find like some elements that come from some places, maybe, a bit problematic. Maybe the regulatory structure there is not so great, or maybe, I've read stuff about rice coming from, different places that have like arsenic in it and this and that. So this is a good, far more important than you would think at first blush. Their flagship multivitamin has USP verification and peer-reviewed and published clinical studies. Plus, all of Ritual's products are vegan, they are non-GMO, and they are third-party tested, so you can trust them. Ritual's multivitamins were specifically formulated to help fill nutrient gaps in diet. So they have key ingredients like vitamin D3 and omega-3 DHA. Omega-3 DHA is supposed to be good for your brain. The D3 has taken care of my D vitamin deficiency that for years, I would go see my doctor and he'd be like, what do you do? Sit inside all day and read the computer? And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, you need more sun because your vitamin D is low. So take some vitamin D. And I've been taking it and I don't have that problem anymore. Their delayed release capsule is designed to be gentle on the stomach. And there's a mint tab in every bottle to keep things fresh. Ritual is a certified B corporation that believes doing good for your health means doing good for the planet. And here's the part that really, all this stuff, I love that I want to know what I'm putting in my body, but it sends it straight to your door each month. So when you run out, you don't go like, oh, I'll get to the supermarket, wherever it is, I'm going to buy this stuff off the shelf later, and then you forget to do it, and then you give it up. This sends it right to your door. And you maintain what you need to do is the habit, or I guess the ritual. Start a vitamin ritual you can trust. To get started, visit ritual.com/majority today. Get 10% off your first 3 orders. That's ritual.com/majority to start your ritual today. And final sponsor of the day. I got mine right here. I'm already half a bottle into it.
Very good.
Liquid IV. Contains 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C. I don't think I would get through that couple of days in Vegas without my liquid IV. 1 stick of liquid IV in 16 ounces of water hydrates you 2 times faster and more efficiently than water alone. I was still drying out there. Dry.
It's a desert.
It's like a desert.
Almost. Yeah.
But with liquid IV, you get 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. It's non-GMO. It's free from gluten, free from dairy, free from soy. And they are on a mission to change the world. To date, the company has donated over 25 million servings in 50-plus countries around the world. For me, I vacillate between my flavors. I like the watermelon. Right now, I'm on like a tangerine kick that has immune support. There's also the matcha one that gives you a little more energy. There's pina colada, there's fruit punch, there's grape, acai berry that you like.
I do like that one.
They come in tiny packets that you can bring with you on the plane. Super easy to do. So I had a bunch when I went to Vegas. Very, very helpful. Despite how dry it was there, I don't feel like I ever got dehydrated. I just got parched in the middle of the night. So I had to keep waking up and drinking it. But it made me feel much better, and also, helped with any, sometimes you sit at the table and they just bring you free drinks.
Right.
Grab your Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco or get 15% off when you go to liquidiv.com. Use the code MajorityRep at checkout. That's 15% off anything you order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. And as always, folks, this program relies on your support. If you want to help this program survive and thrive, become a member today. Join themajorityreport.com. And you get the free show, free of commercials, and then you get the fun half. All right, I want to welcome to the program.
We got to take a quick break.
After we take a quick break, Daniel Medwed, professor of law and criminal justice at Northeastern University, author of Barred, Why the Innocent Can't Get Out of Prison. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigland on the Majority Report. Want to welcome to the program Daniel Medwed, professor of law and criminal justice at Northeastern University, author of Barred, Why the Innocent Can't Get Out of Prison. Daniel, welcome to the program.
Sam, thanks for having me.
Let's just talk about the I guess the predicate to all this is that there's a lot of wrongful convictions. The obvious reason is that so much of our criminal justice system is a function of how much money you have. Is it always a function of, for the most part, like the lack of legal resources by defendants?
I think that's a huge factor, Sam. So many of the documented wrongful convictions, and so far we have about 375 documented DNA exonerations since 1989, where folks were convicted and later exonerated through post-conviction DNA testing of the biological evidence in their case. And there have been another 2,800 or so non-DNA cases. When you deconstruct what went wrong in those cases, you do see that through line you mentioned, Sam, which is a lot of these folks lack the resources to hire a really elite defense lawyer, and they were assigned a public defender who might have had the best goals and the best objectives in mind, but weren't unnecessarily well funded and in a good position to mount a zealous defense. So absolutely, when you look at this, it seems like the poor, the marginalized, people of color are at a disadvantage and much more likely to get wrongfully convicted than people who have adequate financial means.
Okay. And will you do us a favor, just like drop your mic down a little bit, I think, closer.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's great. Okay. That's
Thanks,
helpful. So, all right. So that gives us like sort of the predicate. What is sort of, I guess, I mean, so shocking about your book are these examples of where it seemingly is so obvious that the person or the defendant, or at this point the convicted, is innocent, and there's just not a mechanism to deal with this. It's also interesting, just, we had a very high profile case of Adnan Syed, obviously.
That's right.
Was just released from prison in Baltimore, I guess.
That's right.
And but not everybody's going to have a record-breaking podcast done about them that provides that. I mean, in that instance, was that basically it? I mean, was that the thing that really ultimately, and even still, it took like 10 years.
It's amazing. You're right. I think the podcast was 2014 and he wasn't exonerated, right, until 2022. So think about that. If sunlight is the greatest disinfectant, didn't he have more sunlight than most prisoners? I mean, he had this award-winning podcast, Serial, and he had the attention of the country, not just the criminal justice system, all on him. So I think that is a major factor. And most prisoners lack that benefit. But as you said, he spent 23 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And part of it was the podcast, part of it was the attention, but another part of it was simply, lady luck, good fortune. Because when the prosecutor went back to look in the file, as Maryland prosecutors were required to do because of a law that suggests that you have to get resentenced if you were a juvenile who was sentenced to a life without possibility of parole sentence. So what really precipitated this was not so much a reinvestigation of guilt or innocence, but the prosecutors were doing their job. They were looking into the file to see whether he should get resentenced, and they found all this evidence that pointed to two alternative suspects. So there's a lot of luck involved in these cases too, which I think makes me feel worse, right? About these cases.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. So it was a combination of the high-profile nature of the case and a mandated revisiting of his case simply because he happened to be convicted as a juvenile.
That's right.
I didn't realize that. Well, so in what you do in this book, in addition to talk about sort of like broad stroke issues that impact the ability for people to get exonerated, but you follow a bunch of different individual cases, that some of which you worked on in the context of, I guess, right over here at Brooklyn Law School.
That's right.
In their, I guess, version of the Innocent Project. Tell us about, let's go through some of these. I guess from a Well, actually, let's start with Stephen Schultz, because one of the things that is really problematic is this is plea deals. Broadly, tell us just in general the dynamic that exists with plea deals and why, and how they can both lock you in. The dilemma, I guess, that's associated with it.
Well, yes, absolutely. So as some people know, 95% of criminal cases are resolved through plea bargains. The trial is a vanishing species. It's basically extinct. And the reason why so many cases are resolved through plea bargains, Sam and Emma, is that the system benefits in every way. A prosecutor can lock in a conviction early on. A judge can get the case off his or her docket. A defense lawyer can feel like they got a victory because they got a better sentence for their client than if they'd gone to trial and lost. And the way that the system kind of imposes subtle pressure on defendants, including innocent defendants, lies in the discrepancy between the plea offer and what sentence you're facing if you lose at trial. So let's say you're facing 10 years at trial and the prosecutors give you a plea deal for 3 years, right? Your evaluation of that deal is based on your assessment of the risk. What's my likelihood of being acquitted at trial? What's my likelihood of being convicted? And if you're risk averse, you might take the 3 years regardless of whether you're innocent. Then you add in the factor that you're sort of pleading without access to adequate information. The government doesn't turn over everything in its possession to you beforehand. So you don't know the strength of the government's case against you. So you really can't gauge your risk of losing at trial early on. So some of us call that discrepancy, Sam, between the post-trial sentence you might get and the plea bargain offer as a trial tax. You're facing 10, you're offered 3, it's a 7-year tax on your constitutional right to go to trial. Prosecutors get this, they call it a plea discount. It's a little bit like an early bird special at the restaurant, right? If you act early and save us time, you're getting a 7-year deal. It's just a different way of viewing the world. But regardless of whether you view it as a tax or a discount, all of these incentives are aligned with pressuring both the guilty and the innocent to take a deal.
And I just had on the Thursday a guest on, Dan Cannon. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, Pleading Out, on how plea bargaining creates a permanent criminal class, which came out earlier this year. And you just kind of see how the system is designed to make things easier for everyone involved except for the person taking the plea deal, because it's cheaper, it saves the prosecutor time, and they can focus their efforts elsewhere, and they can also rack up these convictions, and for the sometimes these overworked public defenders, they're able to just move on to the next.
You're absolutely right, Emma. It's a win-win for everyone, except, as you point out, the defendant. Now, sometimes it does benefit the defendant. I'll acknowledge that, right? If you are factually guilty and you're facing, a life sentence, and the prosecutors are worried about their witnesses showing up, and maybe they want to spare the victim the agony of testifying, they might offer you a deal. And so, in some cases, I guess it does benefit the defendant because they're almost certainly going to be found guilty at trial, and they're getting a deal basically for avoiding the hassle for the prosecution and even the risk for the prosecution. But that said, we have this, it's like there's this iceberg. We have documented about 500 plus plea bargain cases where people were later proven to be actually innocent. But we have no idea what's beneath the surface. How many innocent prisoners plead guilty because of this discrepancy, the trial tax that I mentioned?
I mean, based upon how difficult it appears, how difficult it appeers to get exonerated. I mean, if you have 500, I don't know what percentage that is. I would imagine a rather small percentage.
You're right. Yeah.
But based upon how difficult it is, again, not everybody has a podcast that's going to be done about them, and the percentage of people who even probably get in touch with organizations like the Innocence Project or the one that in Brooklyn has got to be also a fraction of those who have been convicted. To be in a plea deal situation when you know that you have not committed a crime, it just like how does one assess even whether there's a good case against you or not? Like, if you know that you're innocent, how do you make that assessment? You have no idea who this lawyer is. I mean, because we're talking about people who are probably getting a pro bono defense, a public defender. the public defender could be, overworked and is just looking around and just assuming like my job is harm reduction, I guess, in the sense that they want to mitigate the amount of time that their clients as a whole spend in jail, and don't necessarily have the time with overwhelming caseload to assess the innocence or not of their clients. How do you, as a defendant, like how do you make that assessment? There's no, I don't know, criminal doula to come in and say like, oh, that honestly, that's the thing that it reminds me of, because going into, when someone's pregnant, you have no idea what part of this is medical procedure, what part of this is just the administrative procedure from the hospital. I mean, all these different factors. And it's got to be much more difficult in a legal setting because this is sort of a life or death type of situation.
Absolutely. And then you could imagine being in that position. And we've all made decisions based on imperfect information, right? We'll make a choice about something and it's really a gamble. But seldom do we make a choice that has a consequence of reducing our liberty, right? Putting us behind bars. But I think a lot of folks I've talked to, they'll say, I took the deal because I was so scared about getting a much worse sentence. And then I thought that I could contest it. That once I pled guilty, I'd find a lawyer or someone else who'd prove my innocence. But that becomes virtually impossible because as a condition to pleading guilty, you have to go on the record and say that you did it. And I know when we ran this little innocence project, Sam, that you mentioned at Brooklyn Law School, it was called the Second Look program. I ran it with a colleague for 4 years. We had criteria for intake because there were so many cases. I mean, one day my bookcase just collapsed on me from the weight of our files. Like hundreds and hundreds of people would write to us. And we had all these random criteria. You had to have 5 years left on your sentence for us to consider you, because we knew it would take a lot of time for us to investigate this. And also, you had to have gone to trial. We didn't take plea cases. I'm kind of embarrassed to say now, because we thought it would be too hard to prove someone's innocence. So there are all these impediments out there, especially for guilty plea cases.
Talk about Stephen Schultz, someone in that situation.
Absolutely. So what happened to Stephen was there was a robbery on Long Island in 1999. A large white man went into a restaurant and stole $32 from a waitress. The waitress and the cook were the only witnesses. There were no other people in the restaurant. And they saw the perpetrator flee into a late model white car with a T and a 1. The police then brought photographs down to the restaurant of large white men who basically fit this description. And independently, the waitress and the cook identified Stephen Schultz as the perpetrator. He had a criminal record. Via pictures. Yeah, there was a photo array. It's called a 6-pack, where there were 6 photos of heavy white men in their 30s that matched this basic description. So, he became a suspect. He had a criminal record. He fit the bill in a lot of ways, but he didn't have a record for violence, notably. That was not his MO. So the police approached him and he said, I was with my roommate watching TV. We were watching a show called Dharma and Greg. Not a very popular show, so not something you'd say you were watching unless it was true, right? Like you wouldn't own up to watching some random sitcom. But nevertheless, they didn't buy that excuse and they put him in prison. He was waiting for trial in the Suffolk County lockup. He was assigned to a public defender who wasn't doing very much for his case, and he read Newsday, the local newspaper in Suffolk County, Long Island, and he came across the following article. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, large white man pleads guilty to 6 robberies. Another guy who could be Stephen Schultz's doppelganger, a guy named Anthony Guilfoyle, had pled guilty to 6 robberies just like this one, the one that Stephen Schultz had been charged with, basically bookending this particular event. They occurred from January to March 1999. The robbery Stephen was charged with occurred in February. So Stephen calls his sister. His sister calls the lawyer and says, lawyer, investigate this case. Go ask about Anthony Guilfoyle. But the lawyer didn't do anything. So at this point, Stephen thinks he is innocent. He doesn't know what his lawyer's going to do, and he's offered 3 years in prison. He's facing more than 10. He turns down the deal. He's innocent. He's going to go to trial. Yeah, please.
This is for stealing $32.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I should mention that he did use a knife. The perpetrator did use a knife. as part of the robbery. So there was force. But yes, it wasn't much money at all. And it was a very flimsy case, but it was predicated on these eyewitness identifications. So he decided, Sam and Emma, I mean, I'd love to get your reaction to this, right? He decided to roll the die and go to trial. He was innocent. He was going to assert his constitutional right to go to trial. At trial, the cook identifies him, says Stephen Schultz is the guy. Later turned out that the cook had his own gun possession charge that disappeared in the aftermath of his testimony. But then an amazing thing happened, something I've never seen. The waitress, the woman who was actually robbed at knife point, got up on the stand and she said, now that I see this guy in person, as opposed to in a photo, I realized that the perpetrator was taller and heavier than this guy. Anthony Guilfoyle, 2 inches taller, more than 100 pounds heavier than Stephen Schultz. But because Stephen Schultz's lawyer had not investigated this angle, this Anthony Guilfoyle angle, he didn't know how to handle this situation. He tried to get a photograph of this guy, Anthony Guilfoyle, into evidence, but under the rules of New York evidence law at the time, a judge refused to let it in. Long story short, he's convicted and sentenced to 11 years in prison. Basically, that's the tax that he faced.
I mean, it's first off, it's nuts that the conviction went through when you had one of your 50% of your evidence and your eyewitness is basically saying no, explicitly no, that's not him.
Exactly.
That's nuts. And so, what happened? He spent those full years in prison.
Not exactly. I'll explain. And this is equally nuts, Sam and Emma, and I'd love your reactions to this too. So I think a lot of people, and this is what precipitated me to do this book, cases like this. I think a lot of people think that maybe errors happen at trial, but the system is set up to course correct, that you have all these appellate and post-conviction opportunities to prove your innocence. So if a mistake was made, hey, we'll fix it later. But that's not true. Our appellate and post-conviction system is set up largely to rubber stamp trials. There's a Supreme Court case from 2017 that talks about the trial as the main event. And in a lot of ways, the appeal is the undercard. It's not as significant as the trial. So we lost. Stephen wrote to me at the Second Look program and asked us to begin investigating this case. And we did. And here's what we found. We found that waitress. She was difficult to locate. We found her and we showed her a photo of that alternative suspect, Anthony Guilfoyle. She identified him with 90% certainty as the man who robbed her. We found Stephen Schultz's roommate, who confirmed that they were watching that TV show Dharma and Greg at the time of the restaurant robbery. And we investigated motor vehicle records. We found that Anthony Guilfoyle, this other suspect's wife, had, get this, a late model white Oldsmobile with a T and a 1 in it. But because of the rules of appellate procedure, we couldn't introduce new evidence at the appeal. Instead, we had to pursue this alternative remedy through New York law, where you present newly discovered evidence that, if it had been introduced to trial, would have probably resulted in a different outcome. That's the legal standard. But we had to get permission from the original trial judge to even get a hearing on this new evidence. And the trial judge said, no, I don't believe your new evidence. I remember that trial. I think that the waitress was scared of your client. That's why she refused to identify him. And ultimately, you guys won't believe this, it took 8 years for us to get him out. But we got him out not through New York state law, not on the grounds of innocence, but through a federal habeas corpus action, it's called, where the judge said that Stephen's lawyer was ineffective for not investigating this case originally. So Stephen was freed, probably just a few months before he would have been freed for good time served anyway, and he was never actually exonerated. So he's never received compensation from the state of New York for what all of us think, or not all of us, but I certainly think was a true tragedy and a wrongful conviction.
And how much of that would you estimate was retaliation for not playing the game and going along with the plea deal?
That is such an interesting point, Emma. I that's a really interesting point. I think that was part of the subtext here, because the prosecutors never really wanted to talk to us about looking into the case anew. Eventually, the prosecutors did reinvestigate it, but it wasn't until years later. So, for instance, when I went to that trial judge again with this new evidence to try to get a hearing, I first went to the prosecutor's office to sort of take their temperature, because I thought if the prosecutors would join in our motion for a hearing, we'd have a better chance of getting it. But basically, the prosecutors didn't want to talk to me. So maybe that was a little bit of a penalty. I think I haven't really thought about it that way, but you've got me thinking, Emma, that might have been part of it. You know, you go along to get along, and Stephen didn't play the game the way prosecutors wanted him to play it, and maybe there was a little bit of this downstream penalty.
How much is there also of a judge not wanting to feel like they messed up? I mean,
yeah, it's a big part of it. You know, we as a society aren't really good at acknowledging our own mistakes, and we get vested in an outcome. Cognitive psychologists call this confirmation bias, or we often call it tunnel vision. Once you've made a decision, you're kind of locked into that decision, and it takes a lot of contrary information for you to deviate from it. I mean, just like on a personal level, there's a lot of data out there saying that couples will stay together for many, many years after they get married, even if objectively they should separate. Right, because they made that decision to get married, and they're going to stick to that outcome. And I mean that, you know, that's a little far afield from criminal justice, but I think it's sort of the same idea. Prosecutors believe the person's guilty. They went to trial. They secured a conviction. It's really hard cognitively for prosecutors and judges to consider the alternative.
Is there also maybe a systemic reasons too? I mean, I think there's something apt about the marriage analogy. But is there not also, like, is there a difference, have you found, in the willingness of judges that are appointed versus those that are elected in revisiting these type of cases? And I mean, all prosecutors are elected, right? And the last thing they want on their record, the last thing they want on their record is reversing what happened under their watch, because it's a loss of like a sort of like 1 point for them. And then it's almost like another net 1 point removed from them because they messed up. In Baltimore, it feels like if that had been the prosecutor that had sent Saeed to jail, then maybe it would have been a different calculation.
Yeah, it's often a new prosecutor, you're right, Sam, who does the right thing, because they can reverse a predecessor's wrongful conviction and feel as though it doesn't make them look weak or ineffective or anything like that. So going to your point, which I think is a really important one, you're right. The vast majority of prosecutors are elected, not appointed. They're elected in 45 of the 50 states, and they're appointed in New Jersey, Rhode Island, a couple other states, as well as in our federal system. There is an argument, and I think you're exactly right, that elected prosecutors and elected judges are more susceptible to the political winds. They're worried about that next election, and they're worried about appearing soft on crime, because a lot of the public identifies more with being a potential crime victim than being a criminal defendant. You know, so a lot of judges and prosecutors think that the way to get reelected is to show that they're really tough. Not that they're open-minded to a potential innocence claim. They're worried that that could be viewed as a form of weakness, which is really unfortunate.
Is there any data, or has anybody attempted to sort of look at that from a data standpoint, that there is a higher rate of revisiting these cases in situations where prosecutors appointed or judges are appointed versus vice versa?
That would be a great research question. I should probably get on it. I mean, I think there's been a lot of qualitative case study analysis, not quantitative, where you'll look at a case like you mentioned this a moment ago in Baltimore. Marilyn Mosby wasn't the DA 23 years ago when Adnan Syed went to prison, and actually she's right now in her own sort of hot water with some potential criminal charges in Florida, and so for her to do the right thing now probably is a political benefit. Not a political cost. So we know there are all these anecdotes and qualitative case studies that suggest this is the case, but I'm unaware of a really good academic study, an empirical study that breaks it down. I think that would be a great research question.
Let's talk about another case that you dealt with at the Second Look program. Bobby Fennell, I think it is.
Yeah, Fennell.
I mean, it's just another example of how difficult it is to have these things revisited.
Yeah. And another amazing case. May I go into some of the facts?
Please.
Yeah. So there was a shooting outside a house where drugs were sold in the 1980s. And a customer apparently was being really rowdy, really unruly. And one of the security guards at the drug operation shot and killed him. Actually, the first eyewitness who came forward, who was a drug user who was just hanging around the facility, he initially said that there were two security guards who took turns shooting this guy. And the two security guards were named Joe Perry and Bobby Fennell. Bobby said he was with his girlfriend at the time. He wasn't even there. He wasn't even about to start his shift. But based on this identification from the single eyewitness, again, a drug user with his own criminal problems, the case went to trial against these two guys, Joe Perry and Bobby Fennell. And they went to trial jointly. Usually in situations like this, you want to fly solo because you might have a different defense than your co-defendant. But for efficiency purposes, the prosecution and the judge put them both together. So that goes to trial, and both Perry and Fennell were found guilty of murder. Then an amazing thing happened. Perry goes to his lawyer afterwards and he says, I've been feeling guilty about this. I did this by myself. Bobby Fennell wasn't involved. He wasn't there. The eyewitness got it wrong, and I'm willing to sign an affidavit to help clear Bobby Fennell. Now, this sort of seems convenient. After he's been convicted, he comes over to say what happened. But it made sense, right? He thought that they maybe both could be acquitted because the case was so threadbare. Just a single eyewitness, a drug user who had a very sketchy story. There were lots of discrepancies in his account. So the judge had a mini hearing right after the conviction and before sentencing on these folks, where this guy, Joe Perry, testified about how he did it by himself, and a couple other people came forward to say that Bobby Fennell wasn't there. The judge didn't believe any of them, affirmed the conviction, and for 16 years, effectively, that was the last word in the case. Bobby then wrote to us at the Brooklyn Law, one of the lawyers involved approached us at Brooklyn Law School at our Second Look clinic, and we began to reinvestigate this. And everything we found verified the idea that Joe Perry had done this by himself. But we didn't have any new evidence. Everything was old and cold. Bobby was with his girlfriend, but the defense lawyer knew that at the time in the 1980s and refused to put her on the stand. Many of the witnesses were dead or were in the wind. We couldn't find them. So we couldn't do anything to free him through litigation. And I tell this very sobering story about how I went to Otisville Correctional Facility to tell Bobby that we couldn't do anything for him, and how he responded with tremendous grace. He made an effort to make me feel better about failing him. It was really a remarkable, exchange where here's a guy in a cage, an innocent man in a cage, who's more concerned about the feelings of the lawyer who had just failed him than about the fact that he might spend the rest of his life behind bars. It was a really amazing experience.
So what kind of reforms can we implement to help this? I mean, aside from sort of like more wholesale attack on the carceral state. Yeah. Within the context of the system that we have now, which I think is, again, I have a lot of issues with the level of incarceration we have in this country, regardless of guilt or innocence. But we have a system undoubtedly that is finding people guilty at a rate that is incredibly excessive. We don't even know, really. I mean, we just have sort of like broad outlines. But in those instances where it's quite clear that people are innocent, I mean, and I assume like we could use double or triple or quadruple the funding we have for public defenders. They're incredibly overburdened in terms of cases and underpaid, but beyond that, what can we do?
Yeah, I think you identified a key issue, money. That's going to be very difficult, of course, because if you're going to use public funds to support public defenders, those funds have to come from somewhere. And politically, it's easier to fund schools and public health care than it is to fund criminal justice.
Barely.
Yeah, barely. Right. We can't really do that. So here are kind of three things I talk about in the book. One, micro level reforms. We can tinker with these rules to make it easier to look at weak convictions, wrongful convictions. So for instance, I talked about how hard it is to bring in new evidence on appeal and how appellate judges display a lot of deference to trial decisions. Maybe we make that deference not quite as strong. We sort of tinker with the rules of appellate procedure. The second batch, I think, is a little more exciting and maybe more, sorry.
Those rules, that's both that would have to be a federal fix, and then it would have to be a state by state
exactly
fix. Okay.
Exactly. A lot of these rules are either in state statutes or Congress passed them at the federal level, or they're in court rules, or they're in court decisions by judges. So we just need to figure out ways to amend the procedures to make them more hospitable to giving a true, genuine, close look to miscarriages of justice. The second batch, I think, might be more beneficial, and I'm curious what you think. I call them macro level reforms. So one thing we could do is each state could set up its own independent innocence commission to look at these cases. Instead of just relying on prosecutors and regular judges, let's fund a explicit independent agency that has money and time and the charge from our government to take a close look at these cases. The UK has a model like this. It's called the Criminal Cases Review Commission. It's been in place since 1995 and has played a role in a number of exonerations. Only one state in the US does this, North Carolina. North Carolina passed this and created an actual innocence commission back in 2006. And this commission, which is not perfect, I talk about it in the book, has played a role in at least 15 exonerations since then, where investigators looked at these cases, and if they found the case to be meritorious, they would refer it to the courts.
Yeah. So that's like a parole board, whereas parole boards need you to essentially accept responsibility for a crime, regardless of whether you're innocent or not, as a sort of almost like a predicate to them giving you, putting you on parole or releasing you for time earned. This would be specifically to investigate effectiveness. And I guess it's really just how much do you insulate this from both the politics of the day, and I guess like you make this a position where it's less about anybody's political ambition, but more about ambition for reform of our criminal justice system.
I think that's right, and I like that analogy. The parole board doesn't work for the reasons you suggest. Parole commissioners need that mea culpa. They need that expression of remorse. They need that apology, basically as a prerequisite to given parole. And if you're innocent, how do you display remorse for something that you didn't do? How do you accept responsibility for something that you didn't do? So this agency would be different. It would be tailored to address factual claims of guilt or innocence. And I think your point is very well taken. It would have to be insulated from these political variables that make it so hard for people to look anew at these old decisions. And then it also goes back to the money problem, because of course it would have to be funded, right, and that creates its own problem. The final suggestion I make, and again, I'm curious what you guys think, is I think a major part of the problem is this perception in our society that people who are behind bars are the others. I call it the othering of our criminal justice system. And so a lot of people think it couldn't happen to them. It couldn't happen to their brothers. It couldn't happen to their sisters. It couldn't happen to their parents. Couldn't happen to their kids. And one goal in this book is to personalize this experience. Stephen Schultz, one guy, and I devote a lot of pages to his story. Bobby Fennell, another guy, devote a lot of pages to his story. And one goal of this is to instill empathy for the people who are in these places. They like to celebrate their birthdays over Zoom with friends near and wide, just like we have all done, or many of us have done during the COVID pandemic. And I think if we could develop more empathy and understand that these are our fellow human beings and not others or somehow different, that could go a long way to improving things.
I imagine, I think and you cover this in the book, but racism also,
yes,
and plays a big part of this, obviously.
A huge part of it. I think you can't talk about the criminal justice system without talking about race. And there is some data suggesting that innocent Black men are 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted of murder than innocent white men. And there was a recent report just a couple weeks ago from the National Registry on Exonerations, which is basically a think tank, that suggests that this data applies to other crimes as well, about 7.5 times more likely to be convicted if you're a person of color. So race, along with some of our earlier points about socioeconomic status, these are key variables as well.
Daniel Medwed, professor of law and criminal justice at Northeastern University, author of Barred, Why the Innocent Can't Get Out of Prison. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
All right, folks, we're going to head into the fun half of the program, wherein we'll talk about some of these pollings. We will also we'll also go over that protest. Stop Oil, is that what the name of the organization is?
Stop Oil.
Just Stop Oil in London pulled a little bit of a situationist style protest. We'll talk more about that when we get there. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. Become a member today at jointhemajorityreport.com. Don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY, get 10% off. Also, final message from another sponsor. You remember the last time you had 2 great nights sleep in a row? Still thinking? Well, sleep better than ever before with Cozy Earth sheets. If you use one of the things about Cozy Earth that I have found, cooling. It is cooling. And it also happens to be, that's key important thing for me.
For me, yes.
I need temperature regulation. And Cozy Earth bedding does that, according to them, because they use premium viscose, which I'm not sure I know what that is, but from highly sustainable bamboo. If you know anything about bamboo, you know that you cannot stop it from growing, and it is basically like a weed. So super sustainable, but also it ends up being super soft, super lightweight, and again, for me, most important thing, cooling, temperature regulating.
I told you I have the comforter in the duvet, and it's like a huge issue for me because I sleep very hot, especially in this time where you don't really want the AC on, but you still might be hot.
You have a temperature regulation problem. I mean, I didn't want to say anything, but
what, are you looking at the fan I have on this desk that
you
I still
have a mini
use?
AC there.
Well,
but that's all right.
Well, why do I have an AC and a mini AC in this office?
Well, it's
because our AC's broken.
Yeah, but it's 60 degrees out.
Okay, all right, keep going.
Look,
but it works for me. Cozy Earth. That's what I'm saying. Jeez.
Save 35%. 35% on Cozy Earth when you go to cozyearth.com/majority. Save 35% at cozyearth.com/majority. Emma.
Yeah.
Today is Monday.
Yes, it is.
What's happening on ESVN?
Don't do that. We might get in trouble. So both New York teams above 500, well above 500. New York Giants 5-1. New York Jets 4-2, defeating the Green Bay Packers and the Baltimore Ravens. No slouches. Whoa! Either of those teams. Whew. We're gonna go hard on ESPN today, myself and Bradley. So check that out. We also will be having Waz on. That's our special guest for today. Yeah, to preview the NBA season, which begins tomorrow. Very exciting.
Now my favorite podcaster, I think.
He's great. I won't say this to him, but when I do listen to the Ringer NBA podcast, if he's not one of the hosts, I don't listen.
Why would you not say that to him?
I just don't want to insult his other co-hosts.
Yeah, but he would like
good,
it.
But
well, yeah,
he makes it, and
Waz
so
will appreciate that.
I will tell him that, I guess. So excited to have Waz on, but we'll also talk about the other games yesterday: the Bills versus Chiefs. Bills defense, Von Miller kind of making a difference there as well.
Pats are back.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about happy little Zappy there, who's look, I mean, it goes to show Bill Belichick can coach anybody. So third string quarterback getting it done for the New England Patriots.
I remember the day that Tom Brady came in for Eason.
That's not going to be
very
the
faithful,
case.
very faithful.
Man,
it's Ramondre
and you call him
Stevenson's
Eason.
season.
Boom. Wait, who was it?
It was Tony Eason, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't.
Oh shit!
I thought it was Bledsoe.
It was
right?
Bledsoe.
Yeah.
No, Bledsoe came in.
I thought you were trying to
after
say Esiason, and I'm like, wait, he didn't play for the Penguins.
Eason. Bledsoe, right? It was Bledsoe, and then Bledsoe went to the Bells.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I had the
It's okay.
senior moment.
It's okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll be talking about all those things.
Jim
also,
Plunkett. He came in for Plunkett after Grogan fell.
Oh man. Also, Bradley overtook me in the bets, so I'm gonna have to eat cheese on camera or something at the end of the year if this keeps up. YouTube.com/.
This Sam Bam Cunningham, I think he's gonna do well.
Oh, okay. We're still on this.
Yep.
Anyway, check out the show.
Oh, and I'll do my plug now. Left Reckoning for patrons. We did continue our Marx reading series where we got to the German ideology, famous book, I guess, by Marx. And more importantly, Bradley, if you can put this up on Sunday, October 23rd, 2022. Oh, sorry.
It's this coming Sunday.
Yes, this coming Sunday.
The next Sunday that happens.
Exactly. Give them a revolution. It's going to be a lot of folks. If you can just scroll down so I can see the list of.
This is
people.
This is like a super group.
Yeah, the Telegram Ballroom. Buy your tickets there. Oh, that doesn't have the list of everybody who's going to be there. But a whole bunch of people. Ben Burgess, This is Revolution. Me, David Griscom of Left Reckoning. Danny Bessner, Anna Kasparian, C. Derek Varn. Lots of folks.
Are you guys going to be all on stage at the same time, or what's going to happen?
Yeah, we're all on stage playing 5-on-5 basketball.
I was going to say this is like Live Aid. When you all come out for. So this is Christmas.
Yeah, it's gonna be a packed show. We're gonna do some panels and stuff like that. So come take a look at us, and if you want to come out to the meet and greet, $60, but you can drink a beer with me.
It is old school telethon vibes, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're raising money for Alex
Jerry
Jones.
Lewis,
yeah. Folks. Wait, Tom Brady subbed in for Matt Cassell in 2021.
Matt Castle.
Wait, in 2021? What?
No, they're busting you.
Son of a bitch. All right, quick break and into the fun half. 646-257-3920 is the number. See you in the fun half.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow.
What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt. What is up, everyone? Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's
Stop talking for a second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is it?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello? Is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single frickin' day.